Hello and welcome to From the BON, the Burnley podcast. I'm Simon Evans and with me is Andrew Greaves, Justin Connolly and Chris Borden. And we're here to look ahead to this weekend's game against Newcastle United and also to look at everything that's been going on turf side during this week. How are we doing, gentlemen?
Grand, yeah, very good.
Very good, thank you.
Very good.
Very well.
Good. Always feel better for a win, even if it's against a League Two side and a fairly disappointing League Two side as well. Looked pretty easy, that one, didn't it?
It seems like we were pretty much in control of the whole game. I mean, I've only seen the highlights, but according to the wireless, Odebert and Zaroury were particularly impressive, so that's positive. I think we've got to find a way to get Zaroury into the side. I think because I've always thought he was like the real deal, and that pass for that second goal for Brun Larsson's goal was sublime, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was like to pull something like that off. You've got to be able to see it before you do it, before you can even think about what sort of pass you're going to play.
Yeah,
the vision he's got is just and the execution of the pass is even better. I think we need a bit of that in the Premier League, don't we?
Yeah, I think it almost, in a way, it's not exactly. It reminded me of one of my favourite passes I've ever seen on the turf. Cesc Fabregas's no-look pass to Andre Schürrle on the Friday night. It literally, it's so delicately weighted. Is that pass? But Zaroury's is the same, and it's a great. I mean, the ball just comes straight into him. Quick 1-2 with Jane, that little flick over the top, and it's a lovely finish from Brun Larson as well. But I agree with you. I think one of the most telling things is that Sander Berg's header from a corner. Set pieces this year
delivered by Zaroury.
Very disappointing. Sander Berg admitted afterwards he doesn't score very many headers, so it was placed perfectly onto Berg's head. And again, Zaroury, you just think we faff about sometimes with set pieces and we fail to beat the first man, or it's flat or whatever. I'm the same as you. Of everyone we signed, and Manuel Benson gets a lot of attention, rightly so. For his goals and things. But Zaroury, to me, is the one that is probably the best of all the wingers that we've got. I know post-World Cup, this, January onwards, he perhaps wasn't as effective in all of the games. But I think he's, fully fit. I think he would be one of the first names on the team sheet for me. Absolutely.
And played a central role, didn't he? Like more of a number 10 role.
Yeah, definitely.
Can he get away with that in the Premier League? I'd be surprised. But he's just got, like you say, he's got that. You look at Benson and we think, like Ian Robben, you know what he's going to do. He's going to cut inside and onto that left foot. But Zaroury can go down the line and get a ball over with his left, like he did for a certain goal for Ashley Barnes against that lot down the road. Or he can come inside on his right, and like the Sunderland goal that he tried to replicate all season long after that, and never quite got there. He's got to. If you look at his experiences going away with Morocco and that unbelievable run they had all the way, to the third, fourth place playoff, and that experience plus promotion. Now he's up a level, and he's had a bit of a tough start. Not starting the first game, getting sent off, blah blah blah. But he's a special player, and you've got to find room for him. And hopefully, despite Koleosho doing really well and Amdouni doing well, just off the right hand side at Forest in particular, you've got to find a way for Zaroury into the side.
Yeah, I think we said last week, didn't we, that, or I think I may have mentioned it, Koleosho, at some point you are going to want to rest him. You are going to want to kind of just, just take him out of the firing line, let him sit and watch. Because at the end of the day, we're expecting him to play Premier League football without ever really watching Premier League football. He obviously probably watched it on TV in Spain, etc. But I think sometimes with these players, a little spell on the bench, a little spell still being in and around, still getting 25 minutes here, 20 minutes there, when, players are tired and things like that, and you can run at them. I think he needs probably, if I'm being really picky, and it is being really, really picky, he probably will benefit from a little bit of time, a game or two, just rested. Let Zaroury get back in. Zaroury was ridiculous in terms of the way his season started. I still now look at that sending off and, there's a flick of the leg out, but it's a winger's tackling. It's a winger's tracking back tackle, not helped by Kyle Walker. But, he's come back into the side against Salford and ran that game, really, alongside Sander Berge, we mentioned with the goal. But, again, Berge really impressive, very much a man for, pulling the strings, dictating things. And there's signs, isn't there? To be able to make 11 changes and navigate a banana skin with inside 30 minutes. I think they beat League One and Championship opposition in the last 2 rounds. You would expect us to put Leeds out on Pens, I think it was. But, that is a tricky tie. Plenty of people. I mean, Luton lost to Exeter. Plenty of teams will go there and struggle and things like that. So, we were talking earlier, Sam, weren't we, off recording about the strength in depth that Newcastle have got. Our strength in depth, never known anything like it. To be able to make 11 changes and still be competitive and still win a football match, that's got to be applauded, hasn't it?
Yeah, it is. New centre half Jacques Cork as well coming in, French lad on the back.
People don't.
No, I mean that.
Cork, and obviously he's played most of his, 99.9% of his professional career in central midfield, but he's often been that screening midfielder just in front of the back four. Even one who's been picking up for aerial challenges, and he can play there. And I'm not suggesting he's going to play there this season, but maybe in years gone by he might have been utilised in that slot. Like I say, he's got that ability to maintain possession, keep the ball, keep it simple. But O'Shea, I believe he'd 120 plus passes. I think when we all used, obviously it's nowhere near the same level, but we all used to wet ourselves when you'd see Xavi had 90 odd passes in a game. For a centre half to have 120 passes, albeit against League Two opposition, just shows the dominance and the style. It's, even though they're playing League Two, we're not going to alter it. We're not going to get dragged down to a more physical, direct game. We're going to play, play to our system. And Al Dakil, I think he's the most passes in a Burnley shirt in the Premier League, and it's the blueprint's there for all to see, isn't it? Even if Richard Keys doesn't like it.
So there you go. From the Be-All End of podcast, where you can not only hear about the Swiss Messi, but now Dar O'Shea is the Burnley Xavi.
I think so. I think it's going to stick. That I think that'll stick. Get that going on social media. Love that.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, it was only Salford City, so there's a big asterisk there. But it is.
Well, I was expecting. I mean, you look at their side, and the couple of Fleetwood rejects and Mari Apper, who must be older than me. But I looked at the side that Salford put out, and I thought, even though it's a small ground, the crowd will be predominantly Burnley fans. The playoffs last year. I mean, they limited Salford support, Stockport's support, because Stockport would have dominated the stadium. They're one of those clubs that, like Fleetwood, who actually supports them. They've gone from 70 odd watching them in the North West Counties League. But it's a breeze, isn't it? But if Exeter have got their way to the last 16, it's there are a few banana skins in there, but onwards and upwards, and Everton away is going to be a fabulous cup tie, I think.
Well, let's talk about that one. Yeah, Justin. I mean, reunion with Sean Dyche.
The Dyche Derby, they called it on the draw on Sky, didn't they? He said, didn't he? He just sort of said, "Oh, it's just another game, isn't it?" But I mean,
of course,
it's got to mean something to him, and it might have meant more to him if he'd been back at Turf Moor. It being at their place makes it a little bit less important for him. It's got to mean something to Tarky and Dwight McNeil as well, hasn't it? Playing against your old club. I mean, I'm not sure how sentimental footballers and managers are these days, but it got to give it a bit of extra spice,
yeah.
For our team, though, I mean, the only guide we've got about who might play is that team that played against Salford. If you look at the starting lineup, there's only 2 players in the team who played under Dyche. There's only Cork and J-Rod who actually were at the club when Dyche was manager, even though it seems like it was only yesterday. So, I mean, it's a good story, isn't it? But at the end of the day, for me, it looks to just be like a very, very winnable tie. You know what I mean?
Winnable tie.
You're talking about squad depth. Well, you see, you talked about squad depth before, and Burnley's squad depth, but in terms of proven Premier League defenders, not necessarily, but in terms of quality of players, Burnley have a greater squad depth than Everton. I'm led to believe Everton have probably put a strong-ish side out. Not necessarily the full 11, but in the circumstances they're in, they're having to field a strongish side. And if they do that against, if Burnley make 11 changes again, I think Everton win the game. But it is. I remember speaking to Sean when he'd just come to the club, sort of October, was it? Exactly 10 years ago now, and he played Watford not long after. And he was like, just no sentiment. He's parked and there's no medals in his house. There's nothing up on the wall. You wouldn't know it was a football manager's, former footballer's house. That's the way he is. It's no act. It's.
I don't know. I'm not buying that this is just another game for Sean Dyche. And he will say that. I know he'll say that, and he'll say, he might concede that there's a reality. Obviously there's a history there, a reality. But I'm not saying that. I'm not buying it because I think he'll be desperate to win that game not because he's got anything against Burnley Football Club. I think he'll get a great reception from the fans, and he'll probably, even at Goodison Park with their supporters, he'll probably still risk a little clap towards the Burnley fans and all that sort of acknowledgement. At the end of the day, Alan Pace sacked him from a job he'd been doing for a decade when he was convinced he was capable of keeping Burnley up in the Premier League. That would have hurt him, no matter how many podcasts he's been on and said, that's the business, that's the way it is. He will be absolutely determined to put one over on him.
You're better than Darren Farley.
No, it's not that good. No. It's not that good.
I think Darren Farley was that great, to be honest.
No, it's not. It's not. But
there is
he will. He'll be desperate to win that game.
Yeah.
Desperate to win. That's it, going back to Watford that time. He had a long history with Watford as player, youth coach, assistant manager, and he never got carried away about going back to Vicarage Road or, winning there and seeing his old mates, Troy Deeney, who he basically, turned his life and his career around, that sort of thing. It was just, he is very sort of, cold and calculated in that, he talks about speaking to business leaders and, that.
Yeah.
It's
I think he's the kind of manager who's desperate to win every game, isn't he? Are we saying he wants to win this game more than he wants to, win in the Premier League or more than he wants to? I know what you mean. There's a little bit of an edge to it probably, and he has got a point to prove, but it's the job he's in now. And he's under a bit of pressure, isn't he? They've not had the best start to the season. I mean, I think they've turned it around a little bit now, but his job is on the line. If we thrash him, it could well be the end for him. But I just think
what a story that'd be.
No, I mean, I'm not saying he's under that much pressure, but do you know what I mean? It's like every Premier League manager is under pressure to win every game, whatever competition it's in. And at the end of the day, this competition is not his priority, is it? His priority is keeping Everton in the Premier League.
Yeah, and we know he's not a cup manager, don't we? I mean, we've been on the wrong end.
Yeah, I can say that again.
We were discussing Lincoln at home. We were discussing Aki Stanley. Cups are a bit of an inconvenience to him. But what I do think he'll be after, they won at Brentford, followed that up with a win at Villa in the Cup. he'll be sensing a bit of a chance to build a bit of momentum. You're right, he has been under pressure. I read somewhere that he can't be sacked because of some clause in his contract whilst a potential takeover is happening. I think from what I gather, he's well protected. I think he's quite a smart guy in terms of when he signs contracts, he's well protected. I kind of agree with Simon that I think there'll be an edge to it. I think there'll definitely be an edge with Steve Stone and Ian Warne, because I think them two are probably a bit more tribal, shall we say, if that's being diplomatic and kind. So I think there'll definitely be edge with Stone and Ian Warne. But I do think Dyche will take probably a little bit of extra satisfaction if he does get one over on us. I'm not sure he'll allow that to kind of, he'll never say that in public, as you say, it'll be the reality of the situation and all of the well-trotted Mills and Boons line that we used to get off him when he was here. It'll be fine margins. It'll be market leaders in terms of what they spent in the transfer window. All of it. We'll be able to get the old Dyche bullshit bingo cards back out again. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it because I think they are, we keep looking at kind of testers. Newcastle on Saturday is not really a litmus test for us because I think nobody's expecting us to go there and win, but it's about performance. Can we keep improving? Can we limit damage limitation? Can we sneak something? Can we get a draw? I know this is a cup tie, but I think we mentioned that run of games that includes Fulham and Bournemouth and Luton, Chelsea, etc. But you tag the cup game onto that because it is a test of squad depth. It's a test of can we manage the emotions. It's a test of playing at a Goodison Park, which is you know what you're going to get at Goodison in terms of the atmosphere, and can you quieten them down? Can you get them to turn on Everton? It is a bit of an away game, unlike away games that we'll face up until then, be it in the cup or not. So I think there is a bit of a, for us, it's a bit of a test and a bit of a, can we see where we're up to? Where are we in the grand scheme of things? So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, should be a good one. Should be an interesting one. And I don't think for 1 minute we're going to be hearing Sean Dyche interviews with him saying, I will love it, but he would love it. Right. Newcastle United up next. They've had a interesting season so far, as we discuss later on with our guest Ian Murtagh in a special Newcastle, not debrief, preview really, with Ian Murtagh, Northeast journalist. One of the things that is interesting though is the form they're in just coming into this, really, because they had such an impressive start, didn't they, against Aston Villa, where we were all saying on the first week that performance stood out to us. And then they sort of lost their way a little bit, but then, they go and get a draw at AC Milan. They beat Sheffield United 8-0, and then they made 10 changes, I think, in midweek, and still beaten Manchester City, who, of course, also made lots of changes. But still, just in Newcastle, it is a tough one, though, isn't it?
No doubt, even though it's not that long since the sort of big money takeover, and they've not had that many sort of transfer windows to spruce the squad up. Eddie's done a fabulous job there, hasn't he? As you would expect him to do. I think it's already one of the toughest games of the season for any team in the Premier League, going up there and taking them on. Like you said, they struggled a little bit after starting really well against Villa, but then I think they beat Brentford, didn't they? And then the 8-0 against Sheffield United. They've steadied the ship a little bit just in time for us to go up there and see how we get on. I don't think you can read too much into that cup win over City, because this will be a different team that we play. I'm not expecting too much, but we don't know what's going to happen, do we? That's why we play the games. They've got better, but so have we. We've got, particularly defensively. I think it's a real shame that still think Lyle Foster's going to be missing again, and I think he's going to be really key when he gets back into the side. But I genuinely think we've got enough to give them a game, and I do honestly believe that we're going to surprise somebody pretty soon, and this could be it.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it is one of them fixtures that, we keep saying it's a free hit. It's a free hit because we've not got into the winnable games yet, have we? Forest away. But I genuinely think it's a test of two styles of football that will complement each other in terms of a game for the neutrals. But it's, I'm fascinated to find out how our setup goes against their setup. Like you say, the one kind of major negative is the lack of Lyle Foster. But, if we can get Zaroury into that game, test Zaroury against the fullbacks at Newcastle, stick some balls into the box, get on top of Nick Pope, look at that press. We know Nick Pope's not going to be using his feet very much. We discussed that with Ian. There's lots of little bits within that, but ultimately what you're looking for is that step up in performance again, aren't we? We're looking for that. Are we comfortable playing out from the back? Are we comfortable, getting them passes? Are we comfortable working the midfield, third? All of them little bits that we talked about last week in terms of what do we look for in a performance when you're not really expecting to win? You're looking for improvements all the time. You're looking for, are we taking steps forward? Because if we take enough steps forward, when the likes of Luton away, Bournemouth at home, Fulham away, when they come, that's when it matters. Get yourself ready for them games. They're the ones that are going to decide where you finish at the end of the season. Not Newcastle away. Newcastle away, you almost kind of write it off. Whatever you get up there, that's fine. Get at least a point against them at home. They're going to be miles ahead of us. They'll be top 4 again this year. You'd suspect, possibly. 4 clean sheets on the bounce, including a trip to San Siro, as Simon said, trip to Bramall Lane. There'll be plenty of teams who don't come away from Bramall Lane with a clean sheet, and at home to, albeit an understrength City side, but by an understrength Newcastle side. So, they are a team which will be a bit, will be tough to break down, won't give away a lot of goals. But, as Company, his press conference earlier said, it's one of the big tests. You mark it down as one of the big tests at the start of the season, but it's a game where you can prove that you belong in the Premier League. And, whatever happens, as long as we put in a performance, I think people will come away and go, you know what, we give them a good game, we perhaps nicked a point. I'm not ruling out a positive result at all, but, we know we're going into that as underdogs, big time.
The one thing is that concerns you is that I said they've got 4 successive clean sheets. They conceded 33 all season last year. Joint top defence with Manchester City. Supposedly Eddie couldn't build a defence. Well, he certainly has done, and it's a regular unit he puts out there usually, and it's usually like sort of Trips, Burn, Botman, Share or something like that. It's pretty regular. They'll miss Barnes. He's got a problem with his toe, and that losing that little bit of pace, it helps because they do have. I mean, if they play Isak up front, who he's pacey and powerful. Wilson, similar. Trips is getting assists aplenty like we're capable of, but we can. That's it. I think we're capable of getting at them, and like I say that. It is interesting with Pope. Are they brave enough to go that high up the pitch and press him, get at him when he's got the ball at his feet? So many sides you're watching at the moment where the goalkeepers are just holding on to the ball for what seems eons because nobody's going to press them. Nobody will press Edison and nobody will press Raya, etc. It's bizarre. Like Verbruggen was a similar one at the weekend, but. Yeah, it was a tough game when they were rubbish under Steve Bruce. Let's be honest, because the crowd get up there and get behind them. It's an intimidating place to play. But now they're a good unit. I fully expected them to finish top 4 with the improvements they made over the summer. And it's one of them. You're expecting Guimaraes to fire at some stage, and I think he's had a quiet start to proceedings. But yes, you keep looking for that winnable game, and Luton's the first one, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I'm quietly have some strange sort of optimism about it, in the sense that the thing I really liked about the Forest performance was there was something about playing away from home which made us play a little bit differently. So I think at home we expect, even in the Premier League, to have the majority of possession and to be able to sort of dictate the tempo a little bit, like we did against United for long stretches. Whereas at Forest, we're backs against the wall. We got to battle. We got to play a little bit more on the counter-attack, which we've said before could be an interesting route for us, given the pace of our wingers and so on. So I really like that Forest performance for that reason. They were a bit more of a battling sort of display, which, we didn't get a battling display against United, and certainly didn't against Spurs. So I don't know. It's our back four. Are they going to turn up and be a solid unit as we've seen they can be, or are they going to be fragile again? And it is tough. It is a tough one. There's no doubt about that. But I just have a little bit of optimism about it for this one, because somewhere along the line, in every season we've survived in the Premier League, one or two of these games that you're not supposed to win, you end up winning, don't you? And that helps you points tally no end to go and do it. We've beaten teams like Liverpool and Chelsea away from home. So, it's not impossible, is it? No. Anything else catching our eye around the Burnley world? It's been a quiet sort of week off the field. There's been no sort of innovative announcements, has there? It seems to, like the board and Alan Pace seem to be leaving it to Vincent to run a football team at the moment.
Imagine that.
The only thing's the Benson injury. That's the only concern, isn't it? Obviously, Foster's got another game of his suspension to serve, but he's like talking about fragility. Benson, and he gets a bit of a knock, and he's out again. And well, who knows how long it's. But again, like Zarori, he's had a stop-start season, probably more stop than start. But the sooner we can get Benson and Zarori firing all cylinders, the better.
Yeah. Kind of proves, though, that, the amount of wingers we brought in. I know we were quite critical about the amount of wingers, but, there's obviously method to the madness there, isn't there, in terms of we are going to go through a lot of wingers in games. We probably average about 4 wingers per game. We do need players in those areas. We've discussed, Vincent Kompany's concept of solid places not really being a thing, and everyone's got a bit more freedom. But you do see it with Benson a little kick on the ankle and he's down. He tries to run it off, and 4 or 5 minutes later he's signalling to come off again. Hopefully it's not too bad, but the amount of wingers we've got, it's a good job Koleosho's kind of started quite well. It's a good job with Goodmanson, and we still don't know whether Goodmanson's going to be fit for this weekend with that injury that forced him off. Brun Larson coming in. It's a good job that we've got these wingers. You think back to some of the recruitment drives, and here we go, Claxon alert, the Dale Stevens summer. We wouldn't have had enough players to fill those slots and to play the system that we play. So there was method in the company madness of buying every winger with a Belgian passport, or whose grandma had once visited Bruges on a day trip.
It was interesting too, wasn't it? I don't know if you'd read the interviews with Andros Townsend this week, where he was talking about this very thing. He was saying, although obviously he's clearly quite disappointed not to have earned a contract, and he said he broke down in tears when Kompany took him aside and said, "Look, we don't." Apparently, the explanation is that they didn't want a 30-plus winger blocking the sort of route for these younger players to come through. And he sort of held his hands up and said, having seen how Burnley are playing with Koleosho and, Brun Larson and all the other young, Trezor, he understands now. And he thinks sort of begrudgingly, he sort of said, yeah, Kompany's obviously done the right thing there, because these players coming through, they need to be playing games, and if I'd been there, maybe I would have got in the way of that. It's a shame he hasn't. I'm surprised he hasn't picked up a club, actually, because the way he played for us in those pre-season games, he was fantastic.
Benfica game, he was great, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Linked with a 3rd division Saudi club that never materialised. Apparently, had been sold a bit of a Yeah, we definitely want you. Again, pretty big money. I mean, I'm going to spend the next couple of months until January getting really fit, and then try and tout myself around the Saudi third division. It must be. I mean, given the quality of the Saudi top league, the third division must be as bad as I play on a Monday night at Soccer Burnley, I have to say. But I'm the same as you. I'm really surprised no one's taking a punt on him. Championship sides. Hopefully, if he can stay fit, because he clearly got himself match fit. He was superb in pre-season. Maybe we see a club who perhaps have an injury and are sitting 8th to 10th in the Championship come January, or come whenever, because he's a free agent as long as they've got space in their squads.
Luton could have a sniff. They've got two sort of like wrecking ball centre forwards. Getting on the end of Andros Townsend cross. They're taking a punt on Barkley. I thought Townsend was a better bet to me. I think Barkley's already injured, isn't he?
Yeah, as is Lokonga. Lokonga, we were linked with out for 2 or 3 months with a hamstring injury, I think, as well. So
Phil Jones, joking aside, Phil Jones is 31, and much maligned at United. He's not got a club, and it's the danger for these players these days that if they end up out of contract, and if they don't get picked up immediately, they're on the scrappy.
David De Gea's considering retiring because nobody's picked him up. That's incredible.
I mean, that's staggering, isn't it? He's Golden Glove winner in the Premier League last year.
Insane.
And he was linked with Bayern Munich, Lazio, linked with a whole host of clubs in Spain, Serie A, Bundesliga, and nobody's taken a punt even as a second, very, very good backup keeper. If you're fighting on a couple of fronts in Europa League, domestic cup competitions, you'd think, why wouldn't you take a punt on someone like De Gea? The younger goalkeepers within your squad will learn a lot from that. And as we've discussed several times, they've gone from a keeper who can't use his feet to a keeper who can't use his hands. So we've got the next instalment of the Anana show this weekend. I don't know who United have got, but yeah, I'm very, very surprised. I'm even more surprised when Chris revealed that Phil Jones is only 31. I cannot believe he's only 31. But there would have been a time when I'd have said, would you get Phil Jones in? Absolutely you would. Like you say, much maligned at United, but you get him fit and you get him a run of games, and he is still, I would suggest, a good quality centre-half for a top-end Championship club. That little bit of experience, that knows what it takes to compete at the highest level, that is absolute gold dust for a Championship side. So, yeah, wish Townsend all the best, because, he looked a good player when he was with us for that short time.
He did, yeah, and it was generous comments of him, really. I thought they were quite mature comments from him. Although I did wonder if part of it is how much of it is him seeing Koleosho and other players and thinking, ooh, yeah, and how much of it is him seeing Redmond, who's in that position that Townsend would have been in, and he isn't getting a kick, is he? So, you wonder if he's thinking I'd probably been in the same position as Redmond on the bench at Burnley. It's not the way you want to really end your career, is it? Anyway, let's get back to Newcastle now. Thanks very much, guys, for that chat. And we will continue talking Burnley-Newcastle after this break with Ian Murtagh. Ian Murtagh, North East journalist, covered Newcastle United for many, many years, knows them inside out, and he's coming up right after this break. So, Ian, it's been an interesting start to the season for Newcastle. I mean, that game against Aston Villa, right at the start, everyone sat up and took notice and thought Newcastle are for real this season. Then a bit of a wobble, but this past week it seems like they've refound things a little bit. Where are Newcastle at the moment?
You've summed it up perfectly there. I can remember at half-time in the Aston Villa game, and I think it was 2-1. Villa were just about getting on top, funny enough. No one would have predicted that would be 5-1, but there was superb second half. Then, of course, no disgrace, losing at Manchester City, pressed the self-destruct button at home to Liverpool, and then turned in a pretty abject performance at Brighton. That's when a lot of questions were asked. Are they the same team as last season? They went to AC Milan in the Champions League, and even then, people were not so much doubting, but they were still asking questions because Newcastle were fortunate to get a goalless draw in the San Siro. Then, of course, they answered superbly with an 8-0 win at Bramall Lane, quite extraordinary result, followed up by a 1-0 win on Wednesday night against Manchester City again in the Carabao Cup. But it is strange. I still think it is far too early to say that Newcastle will repeat what they did last season, So I think there's still one or two questions hanging over the team.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a bit of a change to it, hasn't there? The midfield seems a little bit different with, obviously, Tonali's come in there. But is it what's changed from last year mainly about Newcastle?
Well, first of all, Eddie Howe wanted to strengthen the squad. And I think on the evidence of last night's game against Manchester City, he has done that. Newcastle changed all 10 outfield players. Nick Pope was the only survivor from the game at Bramall Lane. And there were starting debuts for Hall and Livramento. Livramento was man of the match. The young 16-year-old Lewis Miley came into midfield, albeit he only survived 45 minutes. And in the second half, Bruno Guimaraes and who else? Anthony Gordon came on and changed the game. So yes, there are changes. Not apart from Tonali, not so many changes to the actual what you consider the first choice lineup, Simon.
Right.
But there is a debate raging about whether Tonali and Guimaraes can play in the same side, and I don't think we've got the answer yet. What we do know is that Newcastle look better with Sean Longstaff in. Now, Sean Longstaff is not as technically gifted as those players. He's certainly not got the profile or the pedigree of them. But what he does possess is football intelligence, incredible work ethic, and it just works with him on the side. Balance. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, as we all know, football is not one on paper, and you can write down the strongest side, but that doesn't necessarily mean that when they go out on the grass, they are the strongest side.
Yeah, I mean, the team for Burnley fans looking at Newcastle, there's two players obviously jump out straight away to them. Two players who were extremely popular. I'm sure will get a good reception from the few thousand up in the gods. Obviously, Nick Pope and Kieran Trippier. I mean, Trippier seems to have really... he seems to be very popular with Newcastle fans, as he has been with fans everywhere he's been. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, absolutely. I was going to say that they're arguably the first two names on the team sheet, but they are of course, because they're number 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I mean, Kieran Trippier, he joined Newcastle when they were fighting a relegation battle. He left Atletico Madrid, and that first season, it was as much his influence off the pitch as on it. He is arguably Newcastle's most important player. When I covered England, I mean, he was influential for England as well, albeit he might not even be England's first choice right back or even second choice. There's Walker and arguably James ahead of him. But for Newcastle, absolutely superb signing, incredible influence, and very impressive footballer and human being, really. And of course, although in name, Jamal Lascelles is the club captain, but the team captain is Trippier, and he's a wonderful leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Burnley fans would love to see him end his career at the club. I mean, there was a bit of speculation that he was very good friends with Dyche, I think, personally, isn't he? And they keep in touch with texts and all that. Even before he went to Newcastle, there were some rumours that Burnley might somehow be able to prize him back. Hugely popular with the Clarets. And Pope seems to have settled in. Are there any doubts about him at all?
Listen, I think we know that he isn't the best keeper with his feet.
No.
But he's certainly, I would argue, in the top 3 or 4 in terms of reflexes. I know the last season, Newcastle fans felt he should have been England's number 1. I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that Jordan Pickford was from Sunderland. But that's quieting down a bit now. There is that question mark about his footballing abilities, but as a goalkeeper, he's first class. He's pulled off some absolutely wonderful, tremendous. I mean, I don't know if you recall last season there was in a goalless draw at Selhurst Park in January or February, produced a quite outstanding save. I can't remember who from. And then right at the end of the season, Newcastle drew 0-0 with Leicester. It was the point they needed to clinch a top 4 finish. And he had quite literally nothing to do for 89 minutes. Then he pulled off this wonderful, wonderful save. And they say that's the hallmark of a good keeper, when they can keep their concentration for so long and then produce something like that when they've had nothing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. We've discussed it on our podcast quite a bit. We had Brian Jensen, the former Burnley goalkeeper, on talk, who's a goalkeeping coach at Shrewsbury now, talking about this whole business about goalkeepers being good with their feet, and is that being prioritised at the expense of goalkeepers who are good with their hands?
That's right, yeah.
And Pope's an interesting one, but I do think it'll hold him back internationally, yeah.
I remember about 20 years ago, there was a debate about should goalkeepers control the 6-yard box or should they control the 18-yard box? And I remember, Shay Given, who is arguably the one Premier League keeper who's been better than Nick Pope. There was mild criticism that he was only a 6-yard specialist rather than 40 miles down the road. If you remember Mark Schwarzer, who was tremendous at commanding the whole area, and defenders knew that he would come out right to the edge of the box to claim a ball. And I remember talking to one or two centre-halves. In fact, one of them was at the Manchester City game last night, Steve Howie, if you remember him.
Yeah.
And Steve said, it doesn't really matter as long as the centre-halves know what a keeper's going to do. Right. We don't mind a keeper staying on his line if he's always going to stay in his line. We don't mind a keeper coming out to the edge of the box if he's always going to do that. And, in that, Nick Pope, I think he's probably in the middle of that. He doesn't command his whole area, but he commands a sizable proportion of it.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Greasy, looking at Newcastle, you have any thoughts, questions for Ian?
Yeah, I'm really kind of interested in the Eddie Howe dynamic, and I kind of half expected him to be almost like the kind of night watchman. When when he came in, I didn't think he'd last once the kind of Saudi regime was in. I think they'd look for that kind of, star manager. Now, they've not necessarily done that with players. Yeah. Is there any kind of surprise amongst, with you or with the Newcastle fans that Eddie has lasted as long as he has and perhaps even, achieved what he has, which is, fantastic?
Answering the second part of your question first, yes, there is surprise. He has overachieved. He's done an absolutely exceptional job. He's a very decent human being, and he's a very, very decent manager. When he was appointed, he was second choice, if you remember. Unai Emery was offered the job and turned it down. And he came in. Nobody really knew what was going to happen because, of course, although he'd established himself at Bournemouth, his last season there did end in relegation. And the first few weeks at Newcastle, they didn't win. They tended to draw a lot of games. Now, since then, he's proved himself. He's hugely popular with Newcastle fans. But, and this is something we don't know, this Saudi regime, nobody knows how they will react to a losing run, if there is one. They did lose 3 in a row, and there was a little bit of talk, not so much among Newcastle fans, more the media really, saying, is he under pressure? And, when you've got a club whose sworn aim is to be number one in the world, then the stakes are high. He is, if he did have critics 3 weeks ago, then he's answered them with 4 clean sheets in a row. And people forget that was just pointed out to me last night when I was writing my Manchester City report. Newcastle having conceded a goal, I think it's now well over 6 hours of football. So, the fact is he is proving himself all the time. And I would argue that he is as safe as any manager in the Premier League. I mean, Klopp and Guardiola notwithstanding.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I found it a really kind of interesting because when he was at Burnley, I mean, obviously, you've got to kind of look at the context. And when he was at Burnley, he was, a young manager, untested. I've watched some of the documentary, the Newcastle documentary, which I think is fascinating. I love them docs at the best time.
But I think it's hopeless. I think it's a horribly sugared brochure.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? The Burnley one we were discussing was about the same, but there seems to be a bit of a steal about Eddie that I never expected when I saw him at close quarters at Burnley when I used to be in the press box at Burnley and in the press conferences. He's very kind of timid, almost kind of unsure. He looks to be a bit, my wife said the other day, God, he looks like he's grown up. Weirdly, he no longer looks like a
Mine
teenager.
said the same, actually.
You know what I mean? He looks like he's got a bit of, world weariness about him. And the style of football he plays, whenever I see Newcastle, always looks really pleasing and in keeping with what the fans up there expect. You've got exciting players. I never really ever drew that comparison with Eddie Howe, exciting football, 4 clean sheets on the bounce. I don't think he ever achieved 2 or 3 clean sheets on the bounce at Burnley. It used to be, we might score 4, but we'd need to because we'd concede 3.
Right.
It's kind of, is that right? Do you think there's a steeliness about him? And, like I say, an exceptional character, great human being, very thoughtful. Is that added steel what makes him one of the safest managers?
It's interesting the point that you made just a moment ago, that he seemed quite timid at times. Now, when he first joined, and of course the Saudi takeover was hugely controversial, still is, of course. And, I don't think we've heard the last of that, but that's by the by. But Newcastle played at Chelsea and the London media basically grilled him. We'd grilled him as well in weekly press conferences. And he was a little bit like a rabbit in headlights when he was asked, how can you justify working for an owner with such a dreadful human rights record? Since then, I think he's been well advised. Because he is articulate, he will step out those situations quite easy. But basically, he does that by saying, "I am here as a football man. That's my responsibility. You need to look at people," which is fair enough, I suppose. I mean, not everyone could be as articulate as, say, Thomas Tuchel was at Chelsea, and if you remember, on the Abramovich issue, I think he was very good. You see a funny side to Eddie. His face lights up when he talks about his family. I don't think he's very. He's articulate. He's intelligent. He is helpful, but I wouldn't call him charismatic. I think his life is relatively straight-laced. He'll say, I'll go back home after a win. He say, I'll go back home and have a coffee and watch the match. He is very much a football file. He is obsessed with the game, and you can imagine him watching games until 1, 2 in the morning and to pick out faults or pick out something that he wants to pass on to the players. I've heard, though not so much from him, although just before the Carabao Cup final in February, we were asking him about the influences in his life. And of course, he lost his mother when he was at Turf Moor, didn't he? And I think that did upset his equilibrium. And I've never heard him, or you might have, but I've never heard him use that as an excuse. But Eddie Howe watchers have said that was very much a mitigating factor in why the Midas touch didn't necessarily work at Burnley.
Yeah, I think we all kind of assumed, or it was implied that that's the reason he decided to go back to Bournemouth. Obviously, he was spending quite a lot of time from his family. I think his wife had just given birth around about the time that his mum had died as well. But
that's right.
I think you mean about that charisma. I remember Chris on our podcast. His dress sense at times, Simon will attest to his kind of. It's very interesting, and he once came in this big scarf, and Eddie and him had the conversation about this scarf, and it was very kind of a bit, with Dyche, he would always talk about music and things like that. Whereas Eddie, you didn't get the impression that he had much outside of his life other than his family, his wife, his children, and football.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm just fascinated by how well it's gone at Newcastle. And like I say, I think most Burnley fans would wish him the best. I don't think, after the way Owen Coyle had left a few years earlier, there's still a lot of acrimony towards him, but I think there was just a bit of a disbelief, and he came out and said actually he took the Burnley job because it was the one people least expected him to take.
Yeah. Was Jason Tindall with him at Turf Moor?
Yeah, he was.
Right. Because I don't know him a lot, but obviously he lives in a very hot country because he's permatant. There's an in-joke in there on social media. He always likes to be the first one to shake a manager's hand, there's a lot of paranoid remarks about how the Premier League introduced the only one man in a technical area, and they say they've done that just to stop Jason Tindall standing alongside Eddie Howe.
Jason Tindall rule, yeah.
But clearly they work well together. I know Tindall is the one who concentrates on set pieces, for instance, and Eddie Howe's never shy to pass on compliments and to say, this isn't just me. It's not even a double act. He's got a team around him, and he says, he's merely the first among equals.
Yeah, Tindall was always interesting. We were discussing him on the WhatsApp group we have earlier. Kind of, I quite like him. I think he's great, and he clearly doesn't take himself too seriously. He'll know about the social media memes and
I think he does. Yeah.
He plays up to it, doesn't he? But again, that dynamic between them two for me is fascinating because they don't look like two people who would naturally want to spend a lot of time together, going out to pub together, but they're clearly very close, and that tight knit feel of that backroom staff, which again he probably didn't necessarily have at Burnley. Appears to be what's breeding this incredible success for Newcastle. Yeah,
you mentioned earlier how ruthless he is, and sometimes I think he is, but other times, he's kept Matt Ritchie at the club, despite he doesn't play. He was on the bench last night, didn't come on. Lascelles did. Dummett had his first game for 14 months. I think his last game was in the League Cup at Tranmere. He won't play against Burnley, despite an outstanding performance. But, he will praise a player to the hilt and then perhaps leave him out. For instance, this time at the press conference last Friday, he was talking about how Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes, he said, of course they can play together because there has been a debate whether they can or whether Newcastle need a more out-and-out number 6. And if you picked up the Saturday papers, it was all about Eddie Howe giving the vote of confidence and to Tonali. What happened when the team sheet came out at Sheffield United 30 hours later? Tonali was on the bench. So, I think, a lot of that is because he's looking to reshuffle his pack. He's having to manage in a way he's never managed before because he has got such a powerful squad, and Newcastle are attacking 4 fronts, Champions League, League Cup, the league, and of course the FA Cup when it comes around in the new year.
That leads me on to what I was going to ask you about Saturday's game specifically. Yeah. Obviously, with the Champions League there, and it's PSG, isn't it, coming up straight afterwards, which is when it starts to really feel, I would imagine, for people in Newcastle who are back in the Champions League now, PSG at home on a Wednesday night. How is he going to rotate heavily, do you think, at the weekend?
Well, he rotated yesterday, and there are certain players who you'd argue are equals. For instance, if you put Wilson in for Isaac, are they necessarily weakening the side? If Gordon plays or Almiron, is there a weakness? So, there will be, I would imagine, there'll be 1 or 2 changes from the game at Bramall Lane last Sunday, but it will be a strong side, and Eddie Howe, knowing him, will be 100% focused on Burnley, and he will answer no questions whatsoever at tomorrow's press conference about the Champions League game 4 days later.
I don't know if you've had a chance to see much of Burnley this year or the side last year in the Championship with Company, but obviously it's a very different Burnley team than Sean's side. How do you think Newcastle match up against a team that likes to play a lot of sort of possession and that kind of football?
Yeah, I saw Burnley at Sunderland last year, and when Sunderland were outstanding in the first half, 2-0 up, and of course Burnley won the game 4-2. And I remember seeing Alistair Campbell afterwards. I know him vaguely, and he was very, very impressed with that performance. Listen, I think in Vincent Company that Burnley have one of the most respected and likable managers in the country, and it's very easy to like a side who are down at the bottom, and they're no threat at the moment, and they probably won't be this season. But having said that, Newcastle will, I suspect, Newcastle will feel that Burnley are a class above Sheffield United. The 8-0 win last season, Sheffield United, they gave one of the most shocking performances you will ever see. I mean, the way that Almiron scored, it was a great impression of Moses imparting the Red Sea. Some of those goals were criminal to concede. Newcastle should beat Burnley. You know that. I know that. I always think that the first 20 minutes are crucial at St. James's Park. If Newcastle get an early goal, they can do anything. I remember that game against Tottenham last year, and it was frightening. And they, were they 5-0 up after 20 minutes? It was ridiculous. But the way to play Newcastle was how Brentford played them a fortnight ago. And Newcastle won 1-0 with a goal, just one goal in the second half. Brentford were the better team for arguably 40 minutes. And they knew how to play Newcastle. And I think Rico Henry, the left back, when he got injured, that proved to be a little bit of a turning point. But the Burnley, if Burnley play open, well, yes, they'll present Newcastle with problems, but they'll also present Newcastle with chances. So it's a gamble, isn't it? They will play very differently, I suspect, to how Burnley did. They will probably try and play in the same way, and you won't want to hear this like Aston Villa did. Aston Villa went toe-to-toe with Newcastle, and for 40-45 minutes, they were as good as Newcastle. But of course, in the end, they were on the wrong end of hiding.
Yeah, we've seen a few games like that this year for Burnley so far, but they seem to have tightened up a little bit since they brought Charlie Taylor back in and a little bit more conventional, but it's going to be a fascinating one. Ian, thanks very much indeed for your time and your thoughts. That's been really interesting for us, and I'm sure the Burnley fans will appreciate that. Yes, well, I've always liked Burnley because I must tell you this. I went to school called St. Cuthbert's in Newcastle, right. And St. Cuthbert's, who they won the All England final the year after I left, but the colours were Burnley's colours, and it was because back in the day, so many players came from the northeast to Burnley, and they were almost seen as the model for everyone. So that northeast connection always stayed with me, and there was a guy who had a sports shop very close to where I lived called Lou Henry, who I think he was a reserve at Burnley in the 60s. I don't know if you're aware of the name. I certainly haven't seen him in any records, but he was on their books. And I've also got a neighbour who's a Burnley fan as well. So I've always had a bit of a soft spot. Oh, there were plenty of players from the northeast. I mean, yeah. When I started following Burnley, the youth team then would probably have had 6 players in the starting 11 who would be, Brian Laws, Wallsend Boys Club seemed to provide quite a few players. And I remember Brian Laws played against him, yeah. yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, it's been lovely talking to you both. Thanks very much indeed. Well, that's it for this week on From the Be-All End. We'll be back on Monday looking back on our performance at Newcastle United with all the team giving their views and opinions on that performance and our deep analysis as always. And if you do enjoy listening to this podcast, please tell people about it. Send a mate to WhatsApp. Leave us a review somewhere on Apple or anywhere, Spotify, where you listen to the podcast, and do follow us on social media as well at B-Hole Podcast on Twitter and Facebook. Always nice to hear from people. Let us know what you think of the podcast, any suggestions, any ideas for guests. We've got a few more coming up in the coming weeks ahead. So all the best. Have a good weekend and up the Clarets.